Here's an all too common scenario. You're walking through a crowded street, people rushing past, caught up in their own lives, and yet somehow you feel completely alone. Despite being surrounded by countless faces, loneliness hits you harder than ever. This isn't the kind of solitude that offers peace. It's the kind that weighs heavy on your heart, making you question your place in the world. We'll uncover how the Stoic warrior's code offers powerful strategies for confronting and overcoming the deep-rooted feelings of loneliness and isolation that so many of us face. Through the lives of three remarkable individuals, Gerald Wilkinson, Dorothy Molter, and Dick Proenneke, we'll see firsthand how they endured extreme isolation, not just surviving but thriving through it. By embracing Stoic principles, they found strength in their solitude, turning what could have been crippling loneliness into a source of resilience and self-discovery. Their stories serve as blueprints for how you too can use these ancient teachings to transform your isolation into personal growth and fortitude. To find strength and resilience, it's crucial to start by focusing on yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, and your inner struggles. This isn't just about ancient philosophy or distant wilderness stories. It's about giving you the tools to confront the loneliness and disconnection you might be feeling. By tuning into your own experiences and recognizing when you feel lost or disconnected, you can begin to take control. This guide will help you build inner strength, offering practical strategies to navigate these feelings and uncover resilience, no matter how isolated you may feel right now. In 1966, Gerald Wilkinson wasn't just another surveyor. He was a man willing to stare down the unforgiving face of isolation and push himself beyond the limits of reason. Picture this: a lone figure cutting through the brutal heat of the Gibson Desert. 750 miles of desolation stretched out in front of him. No safety net, no lifelines, just him and the raw, relentless wilderness. The physical pain was only part of the battle. The real test? The emotional and mental weight of being utterly alone, swallowed by silence, knowing that every step forward could be his last. For young men today, it's almost impossible to grasp that kind of solitude, that depth of fear and grit. But that's where legends are made, when you face the emptiness and keep moving anyway. Wilkinson's journey began with a sense of excitement, a mixture of nerves and adrenaline. But after just a few days, when the realization of his isolation set in, the silence became overwhelming. No cell phones, no social media, no friends or family to check in with, just the endless stretch of desert ahead of him. For many young men today, the idea of going a few hours without checking a phone can feel unbearable. Wilkinson spent weeks without hearing a single human voice. Here's the thing: loneliness doesn't just happen when you're physically alone. You can feel just as isolated in a room full of people, or when you're scrolling through endless feeds. Wilkinson's experience teaches us something powerful. It's not the absence of people that makes you feel lonely. It's the absence of connection. In the desert, Wilkinson had no control over the searing heat, the lack of water, or the miles of emptiness that stretched ahead of him. The Stoics teach us that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. Wilkinson had a choice. He could either panic, let the loneliness consume him, or he could accept his situation and move forward, For you, this could be accepting that some friendships will fade, that life won't always go as planned, or that the loneliness you feel now isn't a permanent state. It's about focusing on what you can change: your mindset, your actions, your resilience. Imagine a breakup, losing a close friend, or feeling isolated in college or your first job. These moments of emotional isolation can feel just as intense as Wilkinson's desert experience. But what if you reframed those moments? What if, instead of feeling like you're losing control, you focused on what you can change? Wilkinson didn't have control over the desert, but he had control over his next step. You might not be able to change your situation right now, but you can control how you face it. There's a moment during Wilkinson's trek when he finally stumbles across a small, precious water source after days of thirst. The feeling of victory was immense, not just because he found water, but because it was a reminder that progress was possible. It's the same for us. We often think we need massive breakthroughs to feel better, but sometimes it's the small wins that matter most. Whether it's finishing a project you've been putting off, or simply getting out of bed on a tough day, those small wins keep you going. Stoicism teaches us to appreciate these small victories because they build resilience. Now let's dive into the story of Dorothy Molter, the root beer lady, a name that hardly captures the grit and determination she embodied. For over 50 years, Dorothy chose a life most would never dare to imagine, living completely alone in the unforgiving Boundary Waters canoe area wilderness of northern Minnesota. Isolation wasn't just a passing moment for her, it was a way of life, especially during the brutal, bone-chilling winters that swallowed the region. But instead of breaking under the weight of loneliness, Dorothy found ways to carve out human connection. Her homemade root beer became a symbol of warmth and resilience, drawing in the few brave souls who paddled through the wilderness just to find her cabin. Dorothy's story isn't just one of survival. It's about embracing the harshness of life and still finding moments of sweetness to share with others, no matter how remote your world may seem. When Dorothy first stayed through the winter in her remote cabin, the isolation hit her hard. The temperature often dropped below zero, and she had to rely on her own strength to keep the fire going and make sure she didn't run out of food. For days, she wouldn't see another person, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. For many of us, being alone can feel like punishment, but for Dorothy, it became a source of strength. The Stoic warrior's code teaches that solitude can be an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. Rather than fearing loneliness, Dorothy embraced it. She used her time alone to work on herself, to reflect on her life, and to find peace in the quiet. In today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with notifications, messages, and distractions, it can be hard to find time to be alone with our thoughts. But Dorothy's story reminds us that solitude isn't something to be feared, it's something to be used. For young men in their teens and 20s, it's easy to feel like you need to be constantly connected. Social media makes it seem like everyone else is out there, living their best lives, while you're stuck, feeling alone. But Dorothy's story shows that solitude can be your greatest ally. It's in those quiet moments that you can figure out who you really are, instead of filling every moment with distractions. Take a page from Dorothy's book. Use your solitude to reflect, to grow, to learn more about yourself. It's not about escaping loneliness. It's about transforming it. Despite her isolation, Dorothy wasn't a hermit. When visitors did make the trek to her cabin, she welcomed them with homemade root beer and warm hospitality. She understood the value of connection, even in small doses. Those brief moments of human interaction gave her the energy to continue living in solitude. This is a crucial lesson for young men today. Even when you're feeling isolated, it's important to maintain your connections. Whether it's reaching out to a friend, joining a club, or finding a community online, those small moments of connection can make all the difference. Like Dorothy, you don't need to be surrounded by people all the time, but the connections you make, no matter how brief, can fuel your journey. Now, we arrive at the extraordinary story of Dick Proenneke, a man who didn't just survive in the rugged Alaskan wilderness. He thrived there for 30 years, completely on his own. In the vast solitude of Twin Lakes, Proenneke carved out a life of purpose, building his cabin by hand, and living off the land with a quiet, relentless determination. Every piece of wood, every meal he gathered from the wild, was a testament to his self-reliance and mastery over an environment that most would find overwhelming. But what sets Proenneke apart isn't just his ability to survive in isolation. It's the way he embraced it, documenting every step of his journey through journals and film, showing that true fulfillment comes from embracing simplicity and solitude, and turning what many would consider loneliness into a state of peace and self-sufficiency. Proenneke didn't just conquer the wilderness, he made it his home. When Proenneke first arrived at Twin Lakes, he wasn't looking for a vacation. He was looking to build a life. Armed with only basic tools and supplies, he set to work building his cabin, one log at a time. It was hard, grueling work, and there were moments when the sheer physical and mental challenge almost overwhelmed him. But the Stoic warrior's code teaches us that challenges are opportunities for growth. Stoicism teaches that hardship isn't something to be avoided, it's something to be embraced. Proenneke didn't shy away from the difficulty of his task. He knew that the work he was doing, as hard as it was, would lead to something meaningful. It's the same in our lives, whether it's working through a tough job, dealing with a difficult breakup, or simply facing the challenges of everyday life. We grow stronger through hardship. For young men today, it's easy to want to avoid pain and discomfort. We live in a world that values convenience and ease. But Proenneke's story reminds us that the things that matter most don't come easy. Building something, whether it's a career, a relationship, or even just yourself, takes time, effort, and a willingness to face challenges head on. Instead of avoiding the hard stuff, embrace it. The work you put in now will pay off in ways you can't even imagine yet. Proenneke's life in Twin Lakes was marked by long stretches of quiet, especially during the winter months. There were no distractions, no entertainment, just the vast Alaskan wilderness and the thoughts in his head. For many, this kind of isolation would be unbearable, but for Proenneke, it was an opportunity to connect with himself and with nature. For Dick Proenneke, the isolation of Twin Lakes was both a challenge and a gift. There were moments, deep into the winter, where he would sit by the fire, his cabin completely silent, except for the crackle of the flames and the wind howling outside. His isolation forced him into the present, stripping away the noise of the outside world. There was no future to worry about, no past to dwell on, just the present moment and the tasks at hand. This is one of the most powerful lessons Stoicism can teach us, learning to be content with the here and now. In today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with notifications, news, and the pressure to be productive, finding peace in the present moment can seem impossible. But Proenneke's life shows us that solitude can be an opportunity for reflection and mindfulness, rather than something to fear. Think about the pressure you face today, whether it's pressure from school, your family, social media, or your peers. You're constantly expected to plan for the future, to achieve more, to do more, and it's exhausting. But what if you could take a step back? What if you could, even for a moment, focus on the present without the burden of worrying about what comes next? Proenneke's story offers a roadmap. His isolation wasn't just a physical one. It was a conscious choice to strip away distractions and focus on the simple, meaningful tasks that filled his days. For you, this might mean putting down your phone for an hour, taking a walk in nature, or sitting quietly with your thoughts instead of filling every moment with noise. When you learn to live in the present, the feelings of isolation and loneliness that come from comparison and constant pressure start to fade away. One of the most challenging aspects of Proenneke's life at Twin Lakes was the long, cold winters. For months at a time, the snow would trap him in his cabin, and the isolation became more than just physical. It was emotional. The lack of human contact weighed on him. He wrote in his journals about the silence pressing down on him, and yet he found a way to embrace it. Instead of letting the loneliness consume him, Proenneke filled his days with purpose. He meticulously planned his days, ensuring that he always had a task at hand, whether it was chopping wood, preparing food, or maintaining his cabin. He found solace in the work, in the routine, and in knowing that each day brought him closer to his goals. Stoicism teaches us that meaning and purpose don't always come from grand, life-changing moments. Often, it's the small, everyday tasks, the ones we take for granted, that ground us and give us a sense of direction. Proenneke understood this deeply. The solitude of his winter months could have been overwhelming, but by focusing on the tasks he could control, he found a way to transform his isolation into a source of strength. This is especially relevant for young men today. When you're feeling lonely or disconnected, it's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like nothing matters. But Stoicism reminds us that even the smallest tasks, cleaning your room, making your bed, going to the gym, can provide a sense of control and purpose. These tasks might seem trivial, but they can act as anchors, pulling you back into the present moment and giving you something tangible to focus on. Imagine you're going through a tough time. Maybe you've lost a close friendship, or you're feeling isolated at school or work. Instead of letting that loneliness consume you, what if you channeled that energy into something productive? Whether it's learning a new skill, taking care of your body, or just focusing on daily routines, these small actions can help you regain a sense of control and purpose. When Proenneke first arrived at Twin Lakes, he didn't come with a fully built cabin waiting for him. He had to build it himself, log by log, board by board. This was more than just a survival project. It was an act of self-reliance, a testament to his ability to shape his environment rather than be shaped by it. Every time he hammered a nail or sawed a log, he was asserting his independence, reminding himself that he was in control of his circumstances. This is a powerful Stoic idea, the belief that no matter how alone or isolated you feel, you always have the ability to create meaning in your life. Proenneke didn't see the wilderness as something to fear. He saw it as something to conquer, not through domination, but through understanding and respect. For us today, this translates into the idea that even in the loneliest of times, you have the power to shape your own world. Whether it's starting a new project, picking up a hobby, or even creating a new social circle, you're never as helpless as you might feel. Like Proenneke, you can build something, whether that's a physical space or an emotional one, that gives you purpose and reminds you of your strength. Think about the last time you felt truly alone. Maybe it was after a breakup, or maybe it was during a time when you felt disconnected from your friends or family. In that moment, it might have felt like the world was spinning out of control. But what if, instead of letting that loneliness define you, you found a way to create something from it? Maybe you throw yourself into a new project, or maybe you start working on a personal goal you've been putting off. Like Proenneke building his cabin, you can build your own sense of self, piece by piece. Although Proenneke lived alone for decades, he wasn't completely cut off from the world. He maintained a correspondence with friends and family, exchanging letters that kept him connected to the outside world. These letters were his lifeline, reminders that even in the wilderness he wasn't truly alone. It's a testament to the importance of maintaining connections, even when we feel isolated. Stoicism doesn't teach us to reject relationships or community. In fact, one of the core teachings of Stoicism is that we're all part of a greater whole, that our connections to others are essential for our well-being. Proenneke's letters remind us that even when we're physically alone, we can still maintain meaningful connections with others. For you guys today, it's easy to feel disconnected, especially with the way social media can sometimes make us feel more isolated rather than more connected. But Proenneke's story reminds us that we don't need to be physically with people to feel connected. Even a small gesture, a text, a message, a letter can make a huge difference. If you're feeling isolated, don't wait for someone else to reach out. Take the initiative, send that message, and reconnect with the people who matter to you. It's easy to think that loneliness is something you have to endure alone. But the truth is, reaching out, even when it's hard, can be a game changer. Whether it's talking to a family member, calling a friend, or finding a community online, maintaining connections is key to overcoming isolation. Now let's turn back to Dorothy Molter, the root beer lady who lived alone in the Boundary Waters for over 5 decades. Her story isn't just about surviving in isolation, it's about thriving in it. Dorothy Molter's life in the Boundary Waters was marked by long stretches of solitude, especially during the winter months when the lakes froze over and the few visitors she had during the summer were gone. During these times, the only company she had was the wildlife around her. the birds, the fish, and the trees that surrounded her cabin. In her writings, Molter described how the silence of the wilderness could be both beautiful and oppressive. There were moments when the quiet was so intense that it felt like a weight pressing down on her, a reminder that she was truly alone. But instead of letting that silence overwhelm her, she embraced it, using it as an opportunity for reflection and growth. One of the core teachings of Stoicism is that solitude isn't something to be feared. It's something to be embraced. In solitude, we can find clarity, focus, and strength. Molter understood this deeply. She used her time alone to reflect on her life, to appreciate the beauty of the wilderness around her, and to deepen her connection with herself. In today's hyper-connected world, being alone can feel uncomfortable, even scary. We've been conditioned to think that being alone means being lonely. But Molter's story teaches us that solitude can be a gift, a chance to step away from the noise of the world and focus on ourselves. It hits home for us in this day and age. This could mean taking a break from social media, spending time in nature, or simply sitting with your thoughts without distractions. It's in these moments of quiet that we can learn the most about ourselves, what we want, what we value, and where we want to go. The first winter Dorothy Molter spent alone in the Boundary Waters was one of her greatest tests of resilience. The isolation was intense. As the temperatures dropped and the snow piled up, Dorothy faced weeks without any human interaction. The lakes, once teeming with canoeists and visitors in the summer, were frozen solid, cutting her off from the world. At night, the only sound she could hear was the wind whipping through the trees, or the occasional howl of a distant wolf. But it was during this time that Dorothy learned something vital about herself. The loneliness was there, yes, but she realized it didn't have to define her experience. Instead of focusing on what she lacked, companionship, warmth, the comforts of civilization, she began to focus on what she could control. She chopped wood, prepared food, and maintained her cabin. She found joy in the small things, like watching the snow fall or feeling the warmth of a fire she built herself. This first winter alone wasn't just a test of survival. It was a lesson in the power of self-reliance. Stoicism teaches us that contentment doesn't come from external factors. It comes from within. Dorothy understood this deeply. She didn't need distractions or constant social interactions to feel fulfilled. She found peace in the simple, everyday tasks that filled her days. She embraced the quiet, the routine, and the small victories that came with living alone in the wilderness. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that happiness comes from having more friends, more followers, more achievements. But Dorothy's story reminds us that sometimes contentment comes from having less. It's about finding joy in the present moment, in the small things that make up your day-to-day life. Think about the pressure you feel to always be on, to always be connected, achieving, doing something noteworthy. But what if, like Dorothy, you could find contentment in simplicity? What if you could step away from the constant need for validation and instead find peace in the little things? Whether it's taking time to focus on a hobby, enjoying a quiet moment with a book, or even just sitting outside and appreciating nature, these small moments of peace can help you feel more connected to yourself and less reliant on external validation. Despite the intense isolation of the boundary waters, Dorothy wasn't completely cut off from the world. During the warmer months, canoeists and hikers would make their way to her cabin, drawn not just by her famous root beer, but by the warmth of her hospitality. These brief interactions were lifelines for both Dorothy and her visitors. Dorothy's homemade root beer became a symbol of connection. She could have easily turned away from the outside world, retreating into her solitude completely. But she understood the importance of maintaining human connection, even in small doses. Each visitor who paddled up to her cabin left with more than just a bottle of root beer. They left with a sense of warmth, of community, and of being seen. Stoicism doesn't teach us to isolate ourselves completely. It teaches us to find balance. While solitude is important for self-reflection and growth, connection with others is equally vital for our well-being. Dorothy found that balance in her life. She embraced the quiet and solitude of the wilderness, but she also cherished the moments of human connection that punctuated her isolation. This balance is more important than ever. It's easy to swing too far in either direction, either withdrawing completely from social interaction or becoming overly reliant on it. Dorothy's story teaches us that it's okay to spend time alone, but it's also okay to reach out when you need connection. Whether it's a phone call, a text, or even just spending time with a close friend, those small moments of connection can make a big difference. It's about finding a balance that works for you. Solitude can be a powerful tool for personal growth, but it doesn't mean you have to cut yourself off from the world entirely. As Dorothy grew older, the physical demands of living alone in the wilderness became more challenging. But even as her body began to slow down, her spirit remained strong. She continued to live in the boundary waters for as long as she could, even as the winters grew harsher and the solitude more intense. In her later years, Dorothy reflected on her life with a sense of peace. She didn't regret her choice to live in isolation. In fact, she cherished it. The solitude had given her something that few people ever experience: a deep understanding of herself, a connection to nature, and a sense of inner strength that came from years of self-reliance. Her story is a testament to the power of solitude, not as something to fear, but as something to embrace. Stoicism teaches us that life is a journey of constant reflection and growth. Dorothy's later years were marked by a deep sense of acceptance of her life, her choices, and the inevitable changes that come with age. She found strength in looking back on her journey and realizing that everything she had been through, the loneliness, the isolation, the challenges, had made her who she was. The idea of reflecting on life can feel distant, something reserved for later years. But Dorothy's story teaches us that reflection is something we can start practicing now. You don't need to wait until the end of your journey to look back and learn from your experiences. Each moment, each challenge, is an opportunity for growth. Think about the struggles you're facing right now, whether it's feeling isolated, dealing with stress, or navigating tough decisions. What if you could see those challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities to learn and grow? Like Dorothy, you can find strength in reflecting on your journey, even while you're still in the middle of it. Finally, let's return to Gerald Wilkinson, the Australian surveyor who embarked on a solo trek across the 750 miles of the Gibson Desert. His journey, like those of Dorothy and Dick Proenneke, was one of profound isolation, but it was also one of immense personal discovery. As Wilkinson made his way deeper into the Gibson Desert, the vast emptiness of the landscape began to weigh on him. The desert stretched out in all directions, a seemingly endless expanse of sand and rock. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the silence was so complete that it was almost suffocating. Wilkinson wrote in his journals about the intense loneliness he felt during these days. The desert, once a place of excitement and adventure, began to feel like a prison. But instead of giving in to the despair, Wilkinson used this solitude as an opportunity to confront his thoughts and fears head on. Stoicism teaches us that one of the greatest challenges in life is confronting our own thoughts and fears. For Wilkinson, the isolation of the desert forced him to do just that. With no one else around, no distractions, he had no choice but to face the doubts, insecurities, and fears that had been lurking in his mind. This is a powerful lesson for all of us. Loneliness often brings up our deepest fears: fear of failure, fear of being unworthy, fear of not being enough. But instead of running from those fears, Stoicism teaches us to face them, to sit with them, and to ultimately overcome them. The pressures of modern life can often lead to feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. Whether it's the pressure to succeed in school, the anxiety of not fitting in, or the fear of not living up to expectations, these inner demons can feel overwhelming. Wilkinson's journey teaches us that solitude can be a powerful tool for confronting and overcoming these fears. It's easy to distract yourself from your thoughts with social media, video games, or constant activity. But what if, like Wilkinson, you took time to sit with your thoughts, to confront the fears that are holding you back? It's not easy, but it's through this process that real growth happens. Throughout his journey, Wilkinson found small victories that kept him going. Whether it was finding water in a parched landscape or simply making it through another day, each small success gave him the strength to continue. These moments of victory were often fleeting, but they were enough to remind him that he was capable of surviving and even thriving in the harshest of environments. Stoicism teaches us that we don't need grand achievements to feel fulfilled. Sometimes it's the small wins that keep us going, the small moments of success that remind us we're making progress, even when the road ahead seems long and difficult. In a world where success is often measured in big milestones, getting into college, landing a dream job, achieving social recognition, it's easy to feel like you're falling behind. But Wilkinson's story reminds us that progress doesn't have to come in leaps and bounds. It can come in small, incremental steps. This might mean celebrating the small victories in your life, whether it's finishing a project or even just making it through a difficult day. Those small achievements are worth acknowledging. Each one is a reminder that you're capable of moving forward, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Gerald Wilkinson's small victories, like finding a water source after days of intense thirst, or navigating through difficult desert terrain, taught him to appreciate progress. No matter how slow or incremental, it can be tempting to compare yourself to others, especially on social media, where it seems like everyone else is achieving great things. But Wilkinson's journey through the desert is a powerful reminder that success doesn't always look like the big moments. It's the small steps you take each day that get you through the toughest times. In the face of isolation, whether it's the isolation of trying to figure out your future, dealing with personal struggles, or just feeling lost in your current situation, finding those small wins can make a huge difference. Celebrate the moments that show you're making progress, even if they don't seem monumental at first. It might be getting a little better at a skill you're working on, opening up to someone about how you're feeling, or simply surviving a hard day when all you wanted to do was give up. As Wilkinson's trek through the Gibson Desert dragged on, the isolation began to take a toll on his mental health. The heat was relentless, and with no one to talk to for days at a time, he began to question why he was even on this journey. There were moments when the silence became too much, when the vast emptiness around him made him feel insignificant. He began to wrestle with feelings of doubt, wondering if he had the strength to finish what he started. But instead of letting those thoughts consume him, Wilkinson turned to reflection. He used his journal as a way to work through his thoughts, writing down his fears, his doubts, and his hopes. This practice of reflection became a lifeline for him, helping him to stay grounded in the face of overwhelming isolation. Stoicism places a strong emphasis on self-reflection. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, regularly journaled his thoughts and reflections, using this practice to gain clarity and control over his emotions. Wilkinson's journaling practice in the desert mirrors this Stoic tradition, reminding us that reflection is a powerful tool for navigating difficult times. For you, journaling doesn't have to be a formal process. It can be as simple as writing down your thoughts at the end of the day, your fears, your frustrations, and your victories. The act of putting your thoughts on paper helps to bring order to the chaos in your mind. It allows you to confront your feelings head-on, rather than letting them fester. Today's young men face a constant barrage of distractions: social media, instant gratification, and endless streams of information. It's easy to lose track of your thoughts, your emotions, and your goals in the midst of all this noise. But Wilkinson's story and the Stoic tradition remind us that taking time to reflect, whether through journaling, meditation, or simply sitting with your thoughts, can help you regain control over your emotions and your life. In moments of isolation, whether it's physical isolation or emotional disconnection, taking time to reflect on where you are and where you want to go can provide clarity. It can help you see the bigger picture and remind you that the loneliness you feel is temporary, that you have the strength to navigate through it. Toward the end of his journey, Gerald Wilkinson faced one of his toughest challenges yet, a seemingly impassable stretch of desert. His body was exhausted, his mind was strained, and the isolation had worn him down. But instead of turning back, he pushed forward. With each step, he reminded himself of how far he had already come. The desert had tried to break him, but he wasn't going to let it. Wilkinson's perseverance through the harshest conditions became the defining moment of his journey. When he finally reached the end of his trek, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. It wasn't just about crossing the desert. It was about proving to himself that he could endure, that he could push through the loneliness and the hardship and come out stronger on the other side. One of the most powerful teachings of Stoicism is the idea of endurance, of pushing through hardship, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. The Stoics believed that adversity is an opportunity for growth, that it's in our toughest moments that we discover our true strength. Wilkinson's perseverance in the face of overwhelming isolation teaches us that we are capable of far more than we realize. In your own life, when you're faced with challenges, whether it's a difficult breakup, academic struggles, or feelings of worthlessness, remember that these moments are opportunities for growth. They're chances for you to prove to yourself that you're stronger than the adversity you're facing. The pressure to succeed, to live up to expectations, and to keep up with the fast pace of life can feel overwhelming. It's easy to want to give up when things get hard, to retreat into isolation and let the world pass you by. But Wilkinson's story and the Stoic Warrior's Code remind us that true strength comes from endurance. It comes from pushing through the hard times, even when everything inside you is telling you to quit. Think about the last time you wanted to give up. Maybe it was on a project, a relationship, or even on yourself. What if, instead of walking away, you dug in and pushed through? What if you used that moment of hardship as a chance to prove to yourself just how strong you really are? In exploring the lives of Gerald Wilkinson, Dorothy Molter, and Dick Proenneke, we've uncovered the profound lessons they offer on overcoming loneliness and isolation. Each of them faced moments of extreme solitude, whether in the desert, the wilderness, or the snow-covered boundary waters. And yet, through their resilience, reflection, and perseverance, they found strength in their isolation and emerged stronger because of it. The Stoic Warrior's Code teaches us that loneliness isn't something to fear, it's something to confront. Whether you're feeling disconnected from the people around you or struggling with your own thoughts, the principles of Stoicism offer a guide to help you navigate these feelings. By accepting what you can't control, finding purpose in everyday tasks, and practicing reflection, you can turn your moments of isolation into opportunities for growth. For young men in their teens and 20s, these lessons are more relevant than ever. In a world that often feels overwhelming and disconnected, the ability to find strength within yourself is invaluable. Whether you're facing academic pressure, relationship struggles, or simply the loneliness of trying to figure out your place in the world, remember that you're not alone. The journey through isolation can be difficult, but it's also a path to discovering your own strength, resilience, and purpose. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.